We have a long one today, field measuring. It took a lot of time to put this one together, and I hope we covered all the bases, but please, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions at the end, but hopefully we have it all covered. I'm going to go first through the tools that you're going to need. We recommend a red pen or any other color pen that kind of separates, makes it stand out a little bit. Tape measure, laser tape measure, your grid paper, and your camera or whatever's on your phone. So what we did yesterday, Rachel and I, we took our grid paper and we came in here and we measured this whole space with using all of our little notes. We followed all the notes off to the side. We indicated all the power and data. And then you'll see on the back in a couple pages what it ended up looking like when Rachel put it into CAD. And that's what the goal is for every drawing. The goal is to have all that, like the power and data notations on there, the window locations, the ceiling height. There's a little key next to the drawing for the various symbols. So you'll see what a data symbol looks like, what a power symbol looks like, and then what a switch symbol looks like. We'd like it you choose, like we want to encourage you to start using this symbol like throughout all your jobs, and that way we can all kind of identify them the same way. So now Miguel's going to kind of go through how Rachel and I measured this room.
Okay, the first wall that we're going to measure is this one, which is the most complicated one. It's got an angle wall, it's got a column, and a window, okay? I know everybody loves to use the laser because it's easier to measure with, but there are certain areas like this where you want to use the tape measure because it's the accuracy of it, and you want to make sure you get the angle properly. So the very first thing that I will do is I will measure with the laser the wall. Do I have to call the numbers, Carrie?
No, you don't have to tell the numbers.
So anyway,
if you just show where you're mapping it out.
So you measure the wall first, so you get the overall of the wall, okay? Then, now you come with the tape measure, and then you measure your column. You know, like in this case is, let's say, 16 by 16, okay? Then, for the angle, you're gonna take this dimension first, from the column to the furthest point of the angle, which is 6 to 7 inches, okay? Now what you do, if you have a piece of cardboard, it's always good to do a template so you get the right angle. But if you know that it's a 45-degree angle, then it's very simple to figure it out based on the dimensions that I just took. Like whomever is going to program or draw, they can pull the angle based on the 60 inches that I measured there and the wall-to-wall dimension and the 16 inches of the...
I think you need that one too.
Right. Then you go
You will
from
notice,
here.
I want to say one quick thing. On your drawing, the column and the angles are added on things that Miguel's kind of reviewing in today, as well as like the thermostat, the plumbing. These are little bonuses.
And you just measure to the furthest point of the angle too, which is 90 inches. Now, when you measure the window, you want to measure the outside of the frame. Okay? You don't measure the inside, you got to go to the outside. Because if you measure to the inside, now the frame is going to be in your way if you want to bring something up to the window. Okay? And again, for the windows, I always use the tape measure, not the laser. Okay? The reason why is because you want to make sure you get the right dimension. Like in this case, it's 39 and a half, and I always measure both sides. If something is going to come up, let's say, pretend that this is going to be like 29 inches high only, or close to 29, which is the work surface height. You have to measure both sides just to make sure that the one side is not, greater than the other. Okay? Now in this case, we also said that this was going to be a window, but I think we already kind of showed this one.
I do want to, we run into this a lot where we're just told there's a window on this wall.
Right.
I want you guys to know how important it is to know the exact location of this window. So say you told me there's a desk unit here and it needs an overhead. So and you want the overhead to be behind you. Well, if there's a window here and it just says window, I don't know what size to make the overhead.
Right.
Unless you tell me that the window's here, and it's here.
And every time there is a window in a room, and we will measure exactly the way that she described it. Like you get this dimension to the outside of the frame, and then you get this dimension to the outside of the frame, okay? In this scenario, you can go with the laser because the frame, allows you to put that laser against it, and then you get the dimension. Same thing here, but not to the ground.
Does everybody know what AFF stands for? It stands for above finished floor, so we'll write that note a lot on our drawings. We'll say the window is 36 inches AFF, so that just means it's above the finished floor. And also, really important with columns, if that column was, say, here, you would have to measure from this wall to the column, from this wall to the column, and the whole entire column.
All the way around. You have to
Because
get
the column is
everything.
never square.
Now, when you measure electrical, like in this case, the way to do it is always measure to center. If I said is 40 inches to the column, I'm talking about from the column to the center of the outlet, okay? And everybody knows what an outlet dimension is.
And also, when Rachel and I came in here, there's a page of what her and I walked in, and we photographed the whole room. So then, I can look at this, and I could be, if I'm designing it, I could be like, well, that window, is it just completely flush, or does it have a trim? And then I'm able to look at that and be like, well, oh, there's a heavy wood base around it. So you have to take all of that into account. And then I can see what the ceiling looks like, and it just helps you visualize the room better. So it'd be nice if everybody got into the habit of photographing their rooms too, just so we knew what the space was like.
And the reason why photograph works perfect is because, like in this scenario, you have an angle, you have a column, and you have a window. Taking a picture of it and giving it to the designers is a big help for them, so they can visualize what exactly is there. Okay. Now, if you're going to measure this electrical and you're going to go from this wall to this wall, the way that I do the same thing, measure to the center, but I also put an arrow, meaning that it's from this wall to this wall. Because if you just put the dimension, then the designer will be wondering, is it from that wall to this wall or this wall to this wall? So I always put an arrow showing that it's coming from this wall to the outlet. Okay?
If the columns are cylinder or circular, do you just go to the center of the column?
Yes.
Measure?
Yeah, and then I kind of hold the tape measure out when I've done it just to kind of guesstimate.
Gauge.
Yeah.
And obviously you will point that out on the drawing too. Okay?
But I always find, like in this case, it's so important to measure the complete space, especially with an angle, because really this angle is determined by all of these measurements, and then you get that angle. It's good to give a rough estimate of that angle to see how close you are, but by just giving us that angle,
It doesn't
help because
do anything.
you can have that dimension and be at any angle. It just
That's why you have
fluctuates.
to have
That's
this
why you have to have
dimension,
the complete.
that dimension, and this dimension, because that will give you the exact angle.
Another important detail, baseboard. So most of our clients have the vinyl baseboard. It is on your checklist note, so always go through this nice little list here, because it's a nice little reminder. But baseboard can be really important because if it's a wood baseboard, then there's going to be like notching that has to be done in the field. We have to let the client know we're holding things off the wall just so it accommodates that.
Right. One other thing that you have to look for is for these babies. That's called thermostat. Okay? And I will say 80+% of the times we always miss it. And if we have workstations, we have panels coming out the wall or whatever, we cannot block them or we cannot keep them inside a workstation. For the most part, it has to be out. And
Fire alarms are the same way.
right. For the most part, people try to keep them on, like close to the door, like in this case, so nothing is on the way of it. But a lot of times it's not the case, and you have to look for it, because that causes a lot of problems. Okay? And once it's installed, nobody wants to move it. They want you to do miracles with the furniture, but not to move the thermostat. Okay?
Got your plumbing back.
Now, we have this wall where we have an exam room going on where the plumbing is going to be a sink. And we also have a microwave cabinet, and that's what the outlet represents, okay? For plumbing, for the most part, you only measure from this wall to the center. If you see that the location of the height of it is a little bit different than normal, then you will measure, like in this case, it's too high in my eyes, okay?
What's
So,
considered normal?
I believe it's 18 inches center, okay? But this is way higher than 18 inches, so if that's the case out in the field, which it happens at times, then you measure the height as well. Otherwise, you just measure. And again, put in the arrow showing from that wall to the center of the plumbing, okay? Now, when you have the outlet, you have to go from the floor, center of the outlet to the wall, and if the ceiling is not tall enough, if you think that if it is too short, then you also measure to the ceiling, okay? And that will give you the exact location of the outlet for the microwave cabinet, okay? Again, baseboard and anything else that you might think that it might be on the way to do whatever furniture we have to do, okay? A lot of times, you'll have the plumbing here, and you have like probably 10 outlets on the wall everywhere, and you wonder like, okay, why they need all of this outlet? We don't know what the customer's intention is to use the countertop for. So what I do in those scenarios is I just draw the wall. Instead of going on the drawing, I just draw a square and locate every single one of them and do the dimension of all of them. Because if you don't, by blocking one, pretend that the cabinet ends up right here, it's a big problem.
So you do
Here.
an elevation of the wall.
Yeah, I actually draw out in the field and then bring that to the designer so they know exactly what's there and what needs to happen. A lot of times by doing that, what happens is we will ask the customer, okay, if you are thinking of using all of these outlets, we have to redo this camera or change this and that, and then that's how we eliminate problems on the beginning before it becomes a real problem in the beginning. Never assume out there, because that's when things happen.
And also in this room, when Rachel and I were measuring, we just took into account the lowest point of the room when we measured the ceiling. And then I made sure that in my pictures, I knew it was an exposed ceiling. But say in this case where we were doing cabinetry, it would be important to know like that portion of the height,
Yep.
that piece was going to be there. Now, Miguel's going to kind of talk about when a space should require a payment fill measure.
Right. A lot of times I'll see paperwork that is called for a field measure, and it's just one office. It literally is like one wall. On those cases, for the most part, what I suggest is just to send a longer return or whatever top, so we can cut it out on the field and save 3 or 4 hours of either my time or somebody else's time to go out there and measure. Now, if you're already out there, just measure the wall. Just one wall.
And keep in mind too, I know we mentioned, I think there's some confusion about CADs. A CAD is a great tool to have, but a CAD isn't perfect. So if you're doing a wall-to-wall, you still need a field measure.
Yep.
So if you have a CAD of the space and say we did the complete space and maybe now 2 years later they want an office and it's wall-to-wall. Yeah, we have the CAD of it, but you still need to measure that because if it's wall-to-wall, it could be off by a couple inches. So don't just kind of take the CAD. It's great within a couple inches, but it's not, if we're dealing with wall-to-wall, it's not going to do anything.
If you insist and you feel that it's absolutely necessary for somebody to go out there and measure, then make sure you charge for the field measure trip out there. If you don't want to do that and you go by, let's just make this work surface longer, then you just charge for one cut in the field, which is only like $7 or whatever that is.
So that kind of goes next with the project sheet, which is another cut sheet in the folder. And with the project sheet, there's only 2 lines that have to be filled out for the field measure. One's in red and one's in green. And I don't know if you guys know this, but with the project sheet, everything in red is something that has to be filled out the first quote. Everything in green is something that has to be filled out by the order. So for the field measure in red, the very first thing is do you want a field measure? You say yes or no. If you say yes, then you will be charged $180 onto your installation cost. Now, we were kind of talking in the huddle, and we thought, I think there's a comfort level where a salesperson might not know when they need one. Always ask your designer, like, do you think I should have one? There's a lot of times when we just add one in because we feel you need it. And then so we'll kind of let you know, and it's always on your installation spreadsheet so you can see if we charge for it. Then after it goes to order, you fill in the green part, and that's the field measure date. This date is when the space can be field measured. If your space is in drywall, we don't want to field measure. So it's all about keeping in mind that's the crucial thing. 'Cause we've gone out a couple times, and then we get out there and there's no drywall up. So it's very important that you fill in that portion.
There are many variables out there when it's a new construction, and we understand for the most part, everybody's doing their part, all the trades are there, and everybody wants to get the job done. A lot of times when I go out there, half of the drywall is up, okay, which is fine. I can still measure with half or without any, or with all the drywall in. But a lot of problems that I run into is that whenever there's no drywall, there's no electrical location yet. Because there's nothing other than studs, okay? Sometimes, they have a certain date that they have to move in and everybody's rushing everything and we have to measure from the start. That's great, we can do that. However, they have to put the outlets where the designers say it to them. Whatever they show on the drawing, the location of the electrical has to be in there. If it isn't, then you have to have the conversation either with the general contractor or customer, whomever is going to be responsible for it. The other thing too is if I measure from the studs only without drywall, not all the time, but a lot of times it happens often where they move a wall. And I measure already that, but if they move, they don't notify anybody. They just do whatever they have to do. And then now we show up and everything is too long or too short, and then we always eat that. So we have to have some sort of disclaimer to the customer that if anything moves, if they didn't notify us, then it's on them. We're not going to take responsibility of that, something like that.
And that is kind of on this page. This page is it's a Karen email. So when you turn in a job to be field measured, Karen sends your client this email, and it has the date that they're going to be out there. And it also has these notes asking all the drywall must be in place, all the electrical openings data, and then all the areas must be accessible. So then you can kind of see we kind of did a little block over here saying what each area of Karen's email means. And then down here, there's the disclaimer note of everything Miguel just spoke about. So if they're willing to go without the drywall, keep in mind most drywall is 5/8 thick, but it is good to know if they're doing something different. So I always say, did they use 5/8? Are they using something different? Please make sure that they're going to follow the designer's electrical. So I think we probably need to do a better time, like with signing off on all that. So if we do go out on a space and they don't have drywall, we need to have them approve, take responsibility for the whole thing, so that if anything changes, we're not stuck doing like what Miguel said, cutting down or remaking stuff because of
I would want that to be a mandatory thing. So if we're going out there and there's no drywall up and the electrical's not there, then they have to sign
off on that.
Right. Email also helps too. If you cannot get a signature, if it isn't an email, it's still a good tool to go back to them and be like, look, we talk about it, it's in an email, it's in writing.
But then the email has to say, I'm approving it. So
Right.
instead of my signature, I'm approving.
One thing that I'm sure you all heard this before, but if we are going wall to wall, spec damage on the wall, it's impossible not to scratch the wall if it is wall to wall. Okay? Muy importante.
Every time Miguel goes out to field measure, he takes this little handy checklist with him. I kind of put the job path and everything on here. I'm hoping that the salespeople will make a copy of this and keep it with them as well. Because there are some really great things on here that they're just little marks to like spark your attention. For example, elevator. In the past couple months, I think we've had a couple occurrences with the elevator situation and stair situation. So you really have to, when you're doing a space, you have to put yourself in the installer's position and wonder, how am I going to get this
Giant, wonderful table.
into the space? is it gonna be, so you have to take the elevator dimensions, or if you don't have, if it's not gonna work in the elevator, you have to find a path for them to get into the space. And that's just very, I think in the past couple months, we've run into that the most.
And keep in mind that waterfall tables are heavy, like super heavy. That's one of the heaviest items that we
And it's all
that
put
we
together
because it's
already, so-
one piece.
Yeah.
Everything else, if we are going to do a whole private office, it comes in pieces. But a waterfall table is one, because you want no seams,
And you also wanna know the dock information.
right?
Where you're dealing with there and where you're coming from. And it's always good to know what stairs you're dealing with too. Are you dealing with something that's like a straight shot? Or are you dealing with something that you're,
Sorry.
turning around multiple levels? So pictures are amazing. So we have an image folder on the J Drive. When you turn in your job, send all your pictures with it and we'll keep track of all of them. And that works out perfect.
Right, and it's very important that, well, it helps a lot to whomever is going to field measure if maybe, because you're the one that have that communication either with the customer or the general contractor, just tell them to be honest with you about the drywall. Not just-
They're not honest.
I know they're not. Every time I go, it's
It'll
something.
be in.
Well, our standard
Oh,
is
there.
4
Yeah.
weeks after we field measure. So that's always a good reminder to keep saying that. 4 weeks after, we're 4 weeks after we measure, we're 4 weeks after we measure. You just have to kind of keep reminding people that over and over. And then I did a flow chart here of how the field measure process works. So like first, when it goes to order. So you have the project manager / or the salesperson properly fill out the project information sheet and they turn it in with the order. The designer provides Karen with a highlighted plan, and then written on the plan, it has the job name, the number, and if they need it quickly. Then the designer moves that from into the order entry folder. Then Sam orders all the new products, so everything is still getting processed through. Sam's still doing her job, so Sam's doing her part, and in the meantime, Karen's going to be scheduling for the field measure. Karen sends the email to your client. The field measure takes place. The designer double checks everything. Stop it. And the designer does that within 2 business days. If there's any changes, the designer is supposed to have a conversation with the salesperson or the project manager so that they know to convey that back to their client what we're doing, but the order is still moving. And then once there's no changes, the designer submits into the scheduling folder, and 4 weeks later, you have a perfect install. Disclaimer down here at the bottom, because we're in the industry we're in, things could change. So that's when you really have to communicate with each other. You have to talk to Miguel, you have to talk to your designer, you have to be like, okay, we have 2 weeks to do this. Who's field measuring, who's checking it, who's doing all this, so we're making sure it's all going through the system a lot quicker. But if you just you can't follow that process if you're gonna do it. Like you have to do a whole separate personal meeting for stuff like that.
Right. Any questions? Good, let's go.
I do have a question on the wall-to-wall thing. When do you recommend backsplash versus not doing it? So like in a private office, wall-to-wall, you want to cut the return or something like that to make it wall-to-wall. But
We
what's your thoughts?
don't dictate backsplashes. If the wall is extremely crooked, then it's up to the customer if they want to see the imperfection of the wall or if they want a backsplash.
But I think you only
Ours?
want it on millwork.
Yeah.
You don't want
Okay.
it in an
Well, that's what
office.
I just wanted everybody, I
A lot
want
of
to know what the
a lot of
thought
times
process is.
a lot of times people will like to see a backsplash around the column
Oh,
when
really?
we do cut.
Okay.
So it's not up to us. It's up to the customer.
And keep in mind, our standard for private offices is an inch off the
Inch
wall.
off the wall, yeah.
So if we were doing a desk, a U-shaped desk, there would be an inch over there off the wall. That's what we do, unless you're specifically asking for wall-to-wall, then you pay for the cuts. So Colleen's correct. The only lines we do backsplash in, like all the time, is our casework lines. So your break rooms are gonna have that.
And in cases in the offices will occur where it's a column or angle, whatever, and after we do the cut, it's never going to be 100% perfect touching the wall everywhere. So that's where it's a customer decision if they want a backsplash or not.
And that is chargeable.
Right.
If we go back because the customer doesn't want the little edge, then that is something we charge for to go back and apply.
Yes,
So if there was a column over there and then you're cutting that
that's not an inch off, or that's closer?
If you look at how we cut, they're not perfectly right along the wall. Sometimes they do it and I notice they caulk them.
Right. It all depends on the imperfection of the drywall, because, you know, when you do a cut on a column, one side or one point of the board is touching the actual wall, but the other is not, and that is not the board being not straight, is the the drywall being crooked. And 99.9 of the times is imperfections on the drywall.
So when you were saying the 1 inch, it's only on the one side, the long
Yeah,
wall
so like-
part is not an inch off?
If there was a column over here and we were going to wall, they're 1 inch.
It'll be a
over
1
there.
inch.
1 inch
over
over
And
there.
then we
there.
would charge here to scribe cut it.
But if it was along the wall, that's just kind of touching the wall
Right.
sometimes and not touching depending on the wall.
You got it. Yes, you. Never mind.
Never mind.
So then also with measuring wall to wall, if it was like wardrobes on either side, because don't you have an issue sometimes where if I measure it 6 feet high or if I measure it 2 feet high, they're actually different?
Well,
wall to
that's a
wall?
good point. You know, if I was measuring an office in here, I would be measuring at about surface height. When I go out, I always kind of keep it at that height. If you were doing wardrobes, I think I'm gonna answer. You would still keep an inch off the wall over there. And actually, that even looks better when it's a wardrobe right there.
The
because
door
it's like
opens,
taller.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, space there.
Even like if it was overheads, it's, if the whole unit, it's nice to leave an inch over there.
Anybody else?
I want to say, you know, don't be afraid either to, I know some of these spaces can be hard to do by yourself, because I've been out there before doing complete spaces by myself. That's really hard. So if you need to have somebody to help you out, I'll help out. I'll go out with whoever. If they'll measure, or Miguel's going to be doing a lot of it, but if you guys need me to go out on one job with you just to do one in the field, I'll gladly do it just so we do a rundown.
But my suggestion for salespeople, let the professionals do it and you go out and sell more.
But if you're already there,
Right. If it's something small and you're already there, do it. But if it's something large,
I think
Go
that's,
sell.
you have to keep that in consideration. You're charging your clients $180 for this field measure. If you're doing one private office, you're adding $180 to that installation cost. So kind of keep that in mind. So
And-
I've done this before, and sometimes the installation cost is as much as the office.
and keep in mind,
So
they're
that's when
getting,
you have to kind of consider it.
by 180, they're getting a deal, because I'm expensive. All right.
Any more
Anybody else?
questions?
I'm surprised there isn't
I don't
questions.
know.
Did a great job. That's why
Great
there weren't
job.
any questions.
Can I make a comment? For the thermostat, I think it's important to measure the size of it, and same with like
Yes.
floor cores, to know
Right.
not just where the center is, but also the size of it, so we know.
Actually, floor cores is a really good thing. We didn't
Yeah,
touch
we didn't
base on
talk about that.
You should
Yeah.
touch base on that really quick.
Next meeting.
no.
I think
it's
we should
part
do
of
it right now.
Well, it's,
So,
doing
actually, I'm
the
gonna
floor
put,
core,
that's a floor core.
doing the floor core is the same thing that if you were measuring this outlet on the wall, but it's on the ground. You have to measure from the wall, from every wall, to get the exact location of it.
And I like how you said
Yeah.
get the size
Right.
because they're all different
Yeah,
sizes.
and sometimes you go
Take
out
a
to
picture
job,
of it,
and they're
too.
huge, and you're
Yeah.
like, is that how big it's gonna be? But it's covered with like a plywood piece and
Right.
everything. You know, you have to ask a lot of questions.
Right. When it's new construction and it's not wider and everything, it's just a hole, and you don't know exactly what the actual size will be. But it's a good point. We should get the dimensions of it.
I want to touch base too on electrical locations. So many times there's a request to the designer to mark on all the electrical locations. That's great, but I will say 75% of the time they do not follow those locations. So we need to somehow figure out a way that we're really going to enforce those, because where they typically put them causes problems once we field measure, because then we're cutting so much more because they didn't follow our locations to begin with. So I really want to encourage the salespeople to really push for them to follow our locations.